The stars above the Arizona Territory stretched endless and brilliant on that June night in 1882. And Eleanor Hartwell stood alone in the desert with her brass telescope pointed toward the heavens, completely unaware that the dusty cowboy watching her from 30 feet away would change everything she thought she knew about her solitary life. She had been camping at the edge of the Sonoran Desert for 3 weeks now, meticulously charting constellations and calculating their positions relative to the trails that wound through the unforgiving landscape. At 24 years old, Eleanor had left her position as an assistant at the Harvard College Observatory, where women were paid half of what men earned for the same work, and headed west with a purpose that burned hotter than the desert sun. She would create the first comprehensive star chart designed specifically for desert navigation, a tool that could save lives and open routes that prospectors, settlers, and traders desperately needed. The desert nights were cold despite the scorching days, and Eleanor wrapped her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders as she adjusted the telescope. Her notebooks lay open on a flat rock nearby, filled with careful sketches and calculations. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear the footsteps approaching until a deep voice spoke from the darkness. "You looking for something you lost up there?" Eleanor spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man who stood at the edge of her firelight was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell past his collar. He held his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that seemed almost out of place given how startled she was. A Colt revolver hung at his hip, but his posture was relaxed, non-threatening. "You nearly frightened me to death," Eleanor said, pressing her hand to her chest. "Who are you?" "Name is James Cordell. I have been riding through these parts for the past 6 years, and I have never seen anyone camped out here alone, let alone a woman staring at the sky with a contraption like that." He nodded toward her telescope. "Are you lost?" "I am precisely where I intend to be," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin. "I am mapping the stars to help navigate these desert trails, and I would appreciate it if you would announce yourself before sneaking up on people in the dark." James took a step closer, his eyes curious rather than threatening. In the flickering firelight, she could see that he was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with eyes the color of strong coffee and a scar that ran along his jawline. Mapping stars for navigation. "I have heard of sailors doing such things, but never for desert trails." "That is because no one has done it properly before," Eleanor said, relaxing slightly. There was something genuine in his expression, a sincere interest that she rarely encountered. "The desert is vast and treacherous. Many travelers become lost when sandstorms erase the trails or when landmarks become obscured. But the stars are constant. If people knew how to read them properly, they could find their way even when the land itself offers no guidance." James moved closer to the fire, and Eleanor noticed the dust that covered his clothes and the weariness in his movements. "That is remarkably clever," he said. "How does it work?" For the next hour, Eleanor found herself explaining her project to this unexpected visitor. James listened with an attentiveness that surprised her, asking questions that showed he was truly trying to understand. He was a cattle driver, he explained, who had just finished a long drive from Texas to Tucson and was heading back to his small ranch near Prescott. He had been traveling alone, preferring the solitude of the desert to the rowdy company of other cowboys. "Would you teach me?" James asked suddenly, looking up at the star-filled sky. "How to read the stars, I mean. I have been crossing this desert for years, and there have been times when I could have used knowledge like that." Eleanor hesitated. She had come west to work alone, to prove that a woman could accomplish something significant without the interference or condescension of men. But there was something about James Cordell that intrigued her. He did not speak to her as though she were simple-minded or in need of protection. He looked at her work with respect. "I suppose I could," she said carefully, "but I will be here for at least another month, perhaps longer. I need to chart the stars through different phases and from different positions." "I have time," James said, a slow smile spreading across his face. My ranch can wait a while longer. Truth is, I am in no hurry to get back to an empty house. That was how it began. James made his camp a respectful distance from Eleanor's, far enough to preserve propriety but close enough that they could share the fire and the work. The next night, when the sun had set and the desert cooled, Eleanor brought out her charts and began to teach him the basics of celestial navigation. "That bright star there is Polaris, the North Star," she said, pointing. "In the Northern Hemisphere, it is the most reliable guide because it barely moves. But here in the Southern Territories, we need to rely on other constellations as well." James stood beside her, following her finger across the sky. He smelled of leather and sage, and Eleanor found herself acutely aware of his presence. "Show me more," he said quietly. She taught him to find the Southern Cross, to calculate distances using his hand held at arm's length, to recognize the patterns that would guide him east or west. James proved to be a quick student, his mind sharp despite his lack of formal education. He told her stories of the desert, pointing out landmarks she could use as reference points in her charts. Together, they began to create something more comprehensive than Eleanor had imagined possible alone. The days fell into a rhythm. Eleanor would spend the hot afternoon hours in her tent, transcribing her notes and refining her calculations. James would hunt or ride into the nearest town for supplies, always returning with something thoughtful. Fresh fruit, a new pencil when hers wore down, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. In the evenings, they worked together under the stars, their conversations ranging from astronomy to philosophy to their shared dreams of a future different from the one they had known. "Why did you really come west?" James asked one night, about 2 weeks into their arrangement. They were sitting by the fire, taking a break from the charts. It cannot have been easy to leave a position at Harvard. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, watching the flames dance. "Because I was tired of being invisible," she finally said. "At the observatory, I did the same calculations as the men, often more accurately, but my name never appeared on any publications. The director would present my findings as his own, or credit them to male assistants who had contributed far less. I wanted to do something that could not be ignored or stolen, something that would have my name on it, undeniably mine." James nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said. "Wanting to be seen for what you can do, not what others think you should be." "And what about you?" Eleanor asked. "Why do you prefer the empty desert to the company of others?" He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My parents died of fever when I was 16. I had a younger sister, Mary. She was only 12. I worked every job I could find to keep us fed and housed. But 5 years ago, she fell ill with tuberculosis. I did not have enough money for a proper doctor, and the ones who would see us could not help her. She died in the winter of 1877, and I have been alone ever since. It is easier to be alone in the desert, where that is expected, than to be alone in a town full of people." Eleanor reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That is a terrible burden to carry." James looked at her hand on his, and something shifted in his expression. "It is less heavy when I am with you," he said. "You remind me that there are still things worth caring about in this world." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Eleanor had never experienced before. She had always believed that love was a distraction from important work, something that would trap her into a life of domesticity and subservience. But this did not feel like a trap. It felt like a door opening onto a landscape she had never known existed. They continued their lessons each night, but now there was an undercurrent of something deeper running beneath their words. James would stand closer than necessary when she pointed out constellations. Eleanor would find excuses to touch his arm, to adjust the angle of his hat when he was sighting along his hand to measure distances. The tension built slowly, deliciously, until Eleanor thought she might go mad with wanting something she could not quite name. One night, nearly a month into their time together, a sandstorm rolled across the desert with frightening speed. Eleanor was securing her equipment when the wind hit with such force that it nearly knocked her over. James was there instantly, his arm around her waist, pulling her toward his tent, which was more securely staked than hers. They huddled inside as the storm raged, sand hissing against the canvas like 1,000 angry snakes. The space was small, forcing them close together, and Eleanor could feel the heat of James's body pressed against hers. The storm lasted hours, and in the darkness, James told her things he had never spoken aloud. His fears, his regrets, his hope that someday he might build something lasting instead of just drifting alone through the world. "I never thought I would want to stay in one place again," he said, his voice rough. "But since meeting you, Eleanor, I keep imagining what it would be like to wake up every morning and see your face, to build something together instead of always being alone." Eleanor's breath caught. "James, I cannot be some ranch wife who spends her days cooking and cleaning while you are out working. My research, my work, it matters to me. It is who I am." "I know that," James said fiercely. "I would never ask you to give that up. I have seen what you can do, Eleanor. You are brilliant and determined, and the world needs what you are creating. I am not asking you to stop being who you are. I am asking if there might be room in your life for someone who wants to help you be more of who you are." The storm howled outside, but inside the tent, everything went still. Eleanor reached up in the darkness and found James's face with her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, there is room." When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was afraid she might vanish like a desert mirage. But Eleanor kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been denying for weeks, and his arms came around her like a homecoming. They held each other through the rest of the storm, trading kisses and whispered promises. And when dawn finally broke and the wind subsided, everything had changed. The following weeks were the happiest Eleanor had ever known. Her work on the star charts continued, more productive than ever with James as her partner. He rode to surrounding areas, testing her navigation methods on actual trails and reporting back with suggestions for refinement. In the evenings, they mapped stars and talked about the future they were beginning to imagine together. "My ranch has a good southern exposure," James said one night, tracing patterns on Eleanor's palm as they sat together. "We could build an observatory there. Nothing as grand as Harvard, but a place where you could continue your work. And we are only 2 days' ride from Flagstaff, where there is a surveyor who might be interested in your charts. He works with the territorial government on mapping new routes." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, marveling at how natural it felt. "You have really thought about this?" "I think about it all the time," James admitted. "About us, about what our life could look like. I know it is fast, Eleanor. We have only known each other 6 weeks. But when something feels this right, I do not see the point in pretending otherwise." "Neither do I," Eleanor said. She turned to look at him, this cowboy who had appeared out of the desert darkness and somehow become essential to her existence. "When my star charts are complete, I want to go with you. To your ranch to build that observatory, to see what kind of life we can create together." James pulled her close and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Then that is what we will do." 2 months after they first met, Eleanor completed her comprehensive star chart of the Sonoran Desert Trails. It was a beautiful piece of work, with detailed illustrations and clear instructions that anyone with basic literacy could follow. James helped her create multiple copies, painstakingly reproducing her charts by lamplight so they could be distributed to trading posts and settlements throughout the territory. They rode together to Flagstaff, where the territorial surveyor, a gruff man named Thomas Henderson, examined Eleanor's work with increasing enthusiasm. "This is exactly what we need," he said, spreading the charts across his desk. "Do you have any idea how many people get lost in that desert every year? This could save dozens of lives, maybe more. I want to buy the rights to reproduce these and distribute them officially." Eleanor named her price, one that reflected the value of her work, and to her surprise, Henderson agreed without argument. He paid her in gold, more money than she had ever possessed in her life, and promised that every copy would bear her name as the cartographer and astronomer responsible. Walking out of Henderson's office with the contract in hand, Eleanor felt a surge of triumph so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. James wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "You did it," he said, his voice full of pride. "You created something that will matter, that will help people, and no one can ever take that away from you." That evening, in the small hotel room they had rented in Flagstaff, James knelt beside the bed where Eleanor was sitting and took her hand. "I do not have a fancy ring," he said, "but I have a heart that belongs completely to you and a future that means nothing if you are not in it. Eleanor Hartwell, will you marry me?" Eleanor did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, pulling him up to kiss her. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 days later by a circuit judge, with the hotel owner and his wife serving as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple dress of blue cotton that James bought for her from the general store, and James wore his cleanest shirt with his hair combed back. The ceremony was brief and practical, but when James slipped a plain gold band onto Eleanor's finger and promised to love her for all his days, she felt more cherished than any woman in a cathedral. The ride to James's ranch took them through high country, leaving the desert behind for pine forests and rolling grassland. The ranch itself was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy house built of logs, a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. James had built most of it himself, he explained, working alone for years to create a homestead that might someday shelter more than just himself. "It is not much," he said as they rode up the drive, "but it is ours now. We can make it into whatever you want." Eleanor looked at the house, at the wide sky above it, and felt a sense of rightness settle into her bones. "It is perfect," she said. They spent the first weeks of their marriage fixing up the house and planning the observatory. James proved to be skilled with carpentry, and together they designed a small building with a roof that could slide open to reveal the night sky. Eleanor wrote letters to the Harvard Observatory, requesting permission to order certain instruments through their suppliers, and was surprised when the new director wrote back with enthusiasm, offering to help facilitate her orders and expressing interest in her desert navigation work. "It seems that word of your star charts has spread," James said, reading over her shoulder. "You are becoming famous, Mrs. Cordell." Eleanor laughed, still getting used to her new name. "I do not care about fame, I care about doing work that matters." "Then you are succeeding beyond measure," James said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and kissing her neck. "Now come to bed, the stars will still be there tomorrow night." Their life together settled into a pattern that satisfied both of them. Eleanor spent her days working on new astronomical projects, including a series of articles about celestial navigation that a San Francisco newspaper agreed to publish monthly. James worked the ranch, raising cattle and horses, but always made time to join Eleanor in the observatory at night. He became genuinely skilled at reading the stars, and they would often spend hours together in comfortable silence, each absorbed in their own observations but always aware of the other's presence. A year into their marriage, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mix of joy and fear. She loved James deeply and wanted to build a family with him, but she worried about what motherhood would mean for her work. James, seeing her anxiety, took her face in his hands and said, "We will figure this out together. You are not going to lose yourself just because we are having a child. We will make sure you have time for your work, for your observations, for everything that matters to you. I promise." Their son was born in the spring of 1884, during a thunderstorm that shook the house and made the midwife from town mutter nervously. James held Eleanor's hand through the long labor, his face pale but determined, and when their baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced, James wept openly. "He is perfect," James said, cradling the tiny bundle carefully. "Look at him, Eleanor, we made this together." They named him Thomas after Eleanor's father who had died when she was young. Thomas Cordell proved to be a healthy, curious baby who seemed to enjoy being brought outside to look at the stars even before he could hold his head up on his own. Motherhood was harder than Eleanor had anticipated, but also more rewarding. There were nights when she was too exhausted to even think about astronomical observations, when all she could do was feed the baby and collapse into bed. But James was a devoted father, taking his share of the nighttime duties without complaint, and as Thomas grew older and more independent, Eleanor found her rhythm again. By the time Thomas was 2 years old, Eleanor had published a book on celestial navigation for Western territories that was being used by wagon trains and survey expeditions across the frontier. She received letters from travelers who credited her charts with saving their lives, from teachers who were using her methods to educate students, from other women who were inspired by her example. "You have done something remarkable," James told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching Thomas play in the yard. "You have changed how people move through this land. You have saved lives and opened up new possibilities, and you have done it all while being exactly who you are." Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I could not have done any of it without you," she said. "You gave me the space to be myself, to pursue my work. You have been my partner in every sense of the word." "We have been partners," James corrected gently. "This life, this family, this work, we have built it together." 3 years later, Eleanor gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Mary, after James's sister. James held the baby girl with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at Eleanor. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me back a piece of what I lost, for giving me a family again." Mary Cordell inherited her mother's curiosity and her father's easy smile. By the age of 3, she was following Eleanor to the observatory, asking endless questions about the stars. Thomas, now 7, was more interested in the ranch work, following his father everywhere and learning to rope and ride. Watching her children grow, seeing them develop their own interests and personalities, Eleanor felt a deep contentment she had never imagined possible. The ranch prospered. James's reputation as a fair and honest cattle dealer spread, and he was able to hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work, freeing up more of his time to spend with his family. Eleanor's publications brought in steady income, and she was invited to speak at universities and scientific societies across the West. She traveled occasionally, always with James and the children if the distance was not too great, and returned home with new ideas and connections. One evening in 1891, when Thomas was 7 and Mary was 4, the family gathered in the observatory as they often did. Eleanor had a new telescope, one she had purchased with money from her book sales, and she was showing the children the rings of Saturn. "Why does it have rings, Mama?" Mary asked, her small face pressed to the eyepiece. "That is an excellent question," Eleanor said. "Scientists believe they are made of ice and rock held in orbit by Saturn's gravity, but we are still learning about them. Perhaps by the time you are grown, we will understand much more." "Maybe I will be the one to figure it out," Mary said confidently, and Eleanor and James exchanged amused glances. "Maybe you will," Eleanor said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "You can be anything you want to be, Mary. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and James stood outside the observatory, looking up at the stars that had brought them together. 9 years had passed since that first night in the desert, and Eleanor could hardly remember the lonely, driven woman she had been before James appeared in her firelight. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked quietly. "Giving up the solitary life you planned? The freedom to move wherever your research took you?" Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who had become her home in a way no place ever could. "Not for a single moment," she said. "I thought I knew what I wanted from life. I thought success meant working alone, proving I did not need anyone. But you taught me that partnership does not mean losing yourself. It means becoming more fully who you are meant to be." James pulled her close, kissing her with the same tenderness he had shown on that first night in the storm. "You have given me a life I never dreamed I could have," he said. "A family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every single day. I love you, Eleanor, more than all the stars in that sky." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "More than I ever knew it was possible to love another person." They stood together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, while above them the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. The constellations Eleanor had mapped so carefully years ago blazed bright and constant, guiding travelers across the desert trails, saving lives, opening paths to new futures. Her work had made a difference in the world, had left a mark that would outlast her own life. But standing there with James, knowing their children slept safely in the house behind them, Eleanor understood that her greatest accomplishment was not the star charts or the publications or the recognition from scientific societies. It was this: building a life with someone who cherished her completely, who supported her dreams while sharing his own, who had transformed her understanding of what love could be. She had set out to map the stars, to create something lasting and important, and she had succeeded. But in the process, she had discovered something even more valuable: a love that was both wild and gentle, passionate and comfortable, challenging and safe. A love that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure at the same time. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the work. He courted and married the daughter of a neighboring rancher when he was 22, bringing a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah into the family. They built a house on the far edge of the Cordell property and soon blessed James and Eleanor with grandchildren. Mary, true to her childhood promise, pursued her own passion for astronomy. At 18, she left for the East Coast to attend college, one of the first women admitted to study astronomy at Welland College. Eleanor helped her pack, remembering her own days at the Harvard Observatory, and offered advice born of hard experience. "Do not let them diminish you," Eleanor told her daughter. "Your mind is as sharp as any man's, and your observations are just as valid. Stand firm in your knowledge, but also learn to pick your battles. Change comes slowly, but it does come." Mary hugged her mother tightly. "I learned from watching you, Mama. You showed me it was possible." After Mary left for college, the house felt quieter, but Eleanor and James adjusted to this new phase of their life together. They were in their late 40s now, both showing threads of silver in their hair, but their love had only deepened with time. James still joined Eleanor in the observatory most nights, and they still discovered new things about each other, still found reasons to laugh and dream together. Eleanor continued her work, now focusing on training other women in astronomical observation and navigation. She took on students, mostly young women from Western territories who were hungry for education and opportunity. The Cordell Ranch became known as a place where women could come to learn skills that would open doors in a world still largely closed to them. One of her students, a sharp young woman named Rebecca from Santa Fe, went on to work for the U.S. Geological Survey, using Eleanor's methods to map territories across the Southwest. Another, a widow named Catherine, used her training to establish a navigation school in Denver. Eleanor watched these women succeed and felt a fierce pride in what she had helped create. Not just charts and methods, but a community of women who refused to be limited by others' expectations. James supported all of it, even when it meant their home was full of young women asking questions at dinner or practicing their observations on the lawn. "This is important work," he would say when Eleanor apologized for the chaos. "These women need what you can teach them, and I am proud to be part of it." On their 20th wedding anniversary, James surprised Eleanor with a gift that made her weep. He had commissioned a formal publication of all her work, bound in leather and illustrated with beautiful engravings. The title page read, "Celestial Navigation of the American Southwest, complete works of Eleanor Hartwell Cordell, astronomer and cartographer. "Your name," James said, watching her face. "Not buried in footnotes or credited to someone else. Your name on your work preserved forever." Eleanor threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift, by the way he had understood exactly what would matter most to her. "How did I get so lucky?" she asked. "To find you, to have this life with you." "We both got lucky," James said, holding her close. "That night in the desert, when I saw you standing there with your telescope pointed at the sky, I knew I had found something extraordinary. I just did not realize quite how extraordinary until I got to know you." They celebrated their anniversary quietly, with just their immediate family. Thomas and Sarah brought the grandchildren, 3 boisterous boys who kept everyone laughing. Mary came home from college for the summer, full of stories about her studies and the research she was conducting on variable stars. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love, exactly the way Eleanor liked it best. As the evening wound down and the family drifted off to bed, Eleanor and James walked out to the observatory one more time. It had become their ritual, their way of connecting to each other and to the night sky that had brought them together so many years ago. 20 years, Eleanor said, looking through the telescope at the familiar constellations. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together." "I know what you mean," James said. He was standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "But I can tell you this. I have loved you every single day of those 20 years, and I will love you every day for however many more we are granted." Eleanor turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring 2 decades of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, James was smiling that slow, warm smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Come to bed, Starlight," he said, using his private nickname for her. "The universe will still be here tomorrow." "The universe will be here," Eleanor agreed, taking his hand. "But so will we together, and that is the greatest gift of all." They walked back to the house hand in hand, leaving the observatory door open behind them so the starlight could spill in. Above them, the constellations blazed in patterns Eleanor knew as well as her own heartbeat. Polaris shone steady in the north, the Southern Cross glittered low on the horizon, and countless other stars wheeled through their appointed courses, constant and reliable, guiding travelers home through the darkness. The years rolled on with the steady certainty of the stars themselves. Mary completed her studies and took a position at Lick Observatory in California, becoming one of the first women astronomers employed there full-time. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of excitement about her discoveries and the other women scientists she was working with. Eleanor visited her when she could, proud beyond measure of the brilliant woman her daughter had become. Thomas expanded the ranch operations, proving himself to be as savvy a businessman as he was a skilled rancher. His sons grew strong and capable, learning the land the same way their father had. The eldest, named James after his grandfather, showed a particular interest in his grandmother's astronomical work, and Eleanor spent many happy hours teaching him the same lessons she had first taught his grandfather so many years ago. Eleanor and James grew older gracefully, their hair turning white, their faces gaining new lines, but their devotion to each other never wavering. They took walks every evening, weather permitting, usually ending up at the observatory to spend time beneath the stars. James's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making ranch work difficult, but he learned to manage the business side of things while his son handled the physical labor. Eleanor's eyesight began to fade slightly in her 60s, making precise observations more challenging. But she adapted, using stronger lenses and relying more on calculations than direct observation. She continued to write and publish, her reputation as one of the foremost experts on celestial navigation in the American West firmly established. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Mary brought her new husband, a fellow astronomer she had met at Lick Observatory, and announced that Eleanor would soon be a great-grandmother. Thomas's oldest son James had married the year before, and his wife was also expecting. The house rang with laughter and conversation, 3 generations of Cordells together under one roof. That evening, after the party had wound down and the guests had either gone home or retired to bed, Eleanor and James sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the mountains. The sky was clear, promising good viewing conditions for later. 30 years, James said, his voice still strong despite his age. 3 children raised, grandchildren growing up, great-grandchildren on the way, a ranch that is thriving, work that has changed lives. We have built something good here, Eleanor, something that will last. We have, Eleanor agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to hers. After 3 decades together, they had learned to communicate as much through comfortable silence as through words. When I first came west, I was so focused on proving myself, on creating something that would make people take me seriously. I never imagined I would find this, a partnership, a family, a home that feels right in my bones. The desert brought us together, James said. You, with your telescope and your dreams of mapping the stars. Me, a lonely cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found you. Eleanor smiled, remembering that first night, how startled she had been by his sudden appearance, how his genuine interest in her work had surprised and intrigued her. You asked me to teach you, she said. Every night you came to learn about the stars, but you taught me just as much. You showed me that I did not have to choose between my work and my life, that I could have both if I found the right partner. We taught each other, James corrected gently. That is what partners do. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the deepening blue of the evening sky. Eleanor could identify each constellation as it appeared, could calculate their positions and movements without even thinking about it. These stars had been her constant companions for more than 40 years now, since she first fell in love with astronomy as a girl. They had guided her across the desert, had brought James into her life, had provided the foundation for everything she had built. But looking at James now, seeing the love and contentment in his weathered face, Eleanor understood that the stars had been only part of the journey. The real navigation had been learning to open her heart, to trust someone else with her dreams, to build a life that was richer and fuller than anything she could have created alone. I love you, James Cordell, she said softly. More today than yesterday, more this year than last year. My love for you just keeps growing like the universe itself, always expanding. James turned to her, his eyes bright with emotion. And I love you, Eleanor Cordell, more than all the stars you have ever mapped. You are my North Star, my constant, my home. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 3 decades of shared mornings and whispered conversations, of challenges overcome and joys celebrated, of 2 lives so thoroughly intertwined that neither could imagine existing without the other. When the kiss ended, they stood together and walked to the observatory, their steps slower now but no less certain. Inside, Eleanor's telescopes and charts waited, tools of a lifetime of discovery and exploration. James helped her set up the equipment, their movements practiced and coordinated after so many years of working side by side. Through the telescope, Eleanor examined a nebula she had been tracking for months, noting its changes in her journal. James sat beside her, reading through some of Mary's latest letters and occasionally pointing out interesting passages. They worked together in the comfortable rhythm of long partnership, each absorbed in their own tasks, but always aware of the other's presence. Late into the night they stayed there, beneath the stars that had brought them together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and work that mattered. And when they finally made their way back to the house, walking slowly across the familiar ground of their ranch, Eleanor felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. She had set out to map the stars, to navigate the desert trails, to make her mark on the world. And she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. But the greatest discovery of all had been James, the cowboy who asked her to teach him every night and ended up teaching her what it meant to love completely, to partner fully, to build a life that honored both independence and togetherness. The stars would continue their eternal dance long after Eleanor and James were gone. Her charts and publications would guide future travelers. Her methods would be taught to new generations of navigators. Her name would be remembered in the annals of Western exploration and astronomical observation. But the legacy she was most proud of was simpler and more profound. A love that had transformed two solitary souls into partners, into parents, into the foundation of a family that would carry their values forward into the future. As they climbed into bed that night, Eleanor curled against James's side, feeling his arm come around her in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for everything, for seeing me, for valuing me, for loving me exactly as I am." "Thank you," James whispered back, "for teaching me to read the stars and for showing me that even a lonely cowboy could find his way home." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the roof they had built together, on the land they had claimed as their own. Outside, the stars blazed on, constant and true, mapping paths through the darkness for all the travelers yet to come. And inside the house, two hearts beat in tandem, still in love after 3 decades, still grateful for that chance meeting in the desert that had changed both their lives forever. The final years of their lives were gentle ones. Eleanor published her last major work at 70, a comprehensive update to her original star charts that incorporated 3 decades of additional observations. The book was dedicated to James, to my partner in all things, who taught me that the greatest discoveries are not made alone. It became the standard reference for celestial navigation in the American Southwest and remained in print for more than 50 years. James remained active on the ranch until his mid-70s, when a fall from a horse finally convinced him to let his son and grandson take over completely. He spent his remaining years exactly as he had always hoped, with Eleanor by his side, watching their family grow and thrive, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. Mary came from California with her husband and 3 children. Thomas hosted the party at the main ranch house, which had been expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family. There were 13 grandchildren now and 6 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The house overflowed with love and laughter, with the sound of children playing and adults swapping stories. Eleanor, now 70 years old, looked around at the gathered family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Every person in this room was here because she and James had found each other in the desert all those years ago. Every laugh, every smile, every bond of love that connected them, it all traced back to that first night when a curious cowboy asked a determined astronomer to teach him about the stars. That evening, as had become tradition, the entire family gathered outside for a stargazing session. Eleanor, with James at her side, taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the same lessons she had first taught their grandfather 45 years earlier. She showed them Polaris, the North Star, constant and true. She pointed out the constellations, told them the stories behind the names, explained how these distant suns could guide travelers across vast and unfamiliar lands. "Grandma," asked young James, Thomas's eldest grandson who was now a father himself, "what made you decide to map the stars in the first place?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I wanted to create something that mattered," she said. "Something that could not be ignored or taken away from me. But I learned that the most important things we create are not charts or books or even great discoveries. The most important things are the connections we forge with other people, the love we share, the families we build." She looked at James, who was holding one of their newest great-grandchildren in his arms, his weathered face soft with love. "Your grandfather taught me that," she continued. "He showed me that I did not have to choose between my work and my heart. He proved that the right partner makes you more of who you are meant to be, not less." James met her eyes across the gathering, and the look they shared held 45 years of love, of partnership, of shared joys and weathered sorrows. In that moment, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that every choice she had made, every challenge she had faced, had been worth it for this. For this man, this family, this life they had built together beneath the stars. James Cordell passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 78. Eleanor was lying beside him when he took his final breath, her hand clasped in his. His last words to her were, "Wait for me among the stars, my love, I will find you again." Eleanor mourned him deeply, but not hopelessly. They had been granted 47 years together, years full of love and purpose and meaning. She had his children to comfort her, his grandchildren and great-grandchildren to remind her of the legacy they had built together. And she had the stars, their constant companions, shining down with the same steady light that had guided their love from the very beginning. She lived for 3 more years after James's death, years she spent writing her memoir and spending time with her family. Mary moved back to Arizona to be close to her mother, taking a position at a newly established observatory near Flagstaff. They spent many evenings together, mother and daughter, talking about science and life and the remarkable man they both missed. On the night before Eleanor died, at the age of 73, she asked Mary to help her out to the observatory one last time. It was a clear desert night, the stars burning bright and close, and Eleanor sat in the chair where she had spent so many thousands of hours observing the heavens. "Your father proposed to me under these stars," Eleanor told her daughter. "We built our life together beneath them, and now I am ready to join him wherever he has gone." "Mama," Mary said, tears streaming down her face, "you have been the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You showed me what was possible, what I could become. You changed the world, and you did it without ever compromising who you were." Eleanor smiled, reaching out to take her daughter's hand. "I was lucky," she said simply. "Lucky to have work I loved, lucky to have children who made me proud, lucky beyond measure to have found your father. He was my true north, my constant star, and now I get to go home to him." She died peacefully in her sleep that night, in the bed she had shared with James for 47 years, with Mary and Thomas sitting vigil beside her. And though her family mourned her passing, they also celebrated a life extraordinarily well lived, a legacy that would continue to inspire and guide long after she was gone. Eleanor Hartwell Cordell was buried beside her husband on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a clear view of the southern sky she had loved so dearly. Her tombstone was simple: Eleanor Hartwell Cordell, 1858 to 1931. Astronomer, cartographer, navigator of stars and hearts. Her star charts remained in use for decades, guiding countless travelers safely through the southwestern deserts. Her writings inspired generations of women scientists who came after her. But her greatest legacy walked and breathed in the descendants who carried forward her values. Her fierce independence, her dedication to important work, her belief that love and partnership could make you stronger rather than weaker.